Welcome back to the panel discussion, Digital Transformation, the Consumerization of IT, sponsored by Red Hat on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm Jason Miller. My guests today are Guy Cavallo, the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Small Business Administration, Mark Schwartz, the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services at the Homeland Security Department, Mike Hermes, the Chief Technology Officer at the Homeland Security Department, and Adam Clader, the Chief Architect in the Office of the Chief Technologist for Red Hat North America Public Sector. So Mark, you're just about to jump in on something that Mike Hermes said regarding user versus customer. I was going to split the hair, but go ahead, take us away, Mark.
Yeah, I wanted to build a little bit on what Mike said there. Sure, we work with users and try to figure out how best to meet their needs as they're using our systems. But there are potentially an infinite number of things that would help users. You know, the question really is why. We always ask why. Why are we building this? Why are we prioritizing this thing? And generally, the why has to do with a customer. You know, we want to improve customer service for somebody, and a good way to do that is by providing our internal users a certain capability. So that's the reason why we choose that capability rather than others. We have this other customer base, as I mentioned, those who are concerned about national security and fraud. So we are giving the user this capability because it's going to help us prevent national security threats and fraud and so on. And that's how we see the interaction between those two things, the user and customer.
Adam, react to that a little bit, because I get the impression that they're using two different words, but I'm seeing the same. That your user base, your customer base is huge, so you're really trying to make a lot of people happy.
I think a perfect example, right? When I went through my global entry interview, I went in and I was the customer. I was buying this service from USCIS, right? And that is your product, right?
No, it's
no,
not.
It's someone else. Oh, I killed it. Sorry. That is CBP.
It's a great product, so I'll take credit.
It is a great product. So I go in and I'm there interacting with an officer who's conducting an interview, and he's using an application to actually manage that entire process. So I was the customer, I'm paying, but the user of the application that's actually servicing that customer is completely separate, right? So the needs of that individual in the field to meet my need were completely different.
Yes.
Guy, do you get a sense that SBA, much smaller agency, but you have multiple users, multiple customers, you have businesses, you have small businesses, you have even large businesses. Give me a sense of how you are defining that user, who your user is and how you're meeting their needs.
Sure, like as the panel already addressed, when you think about it, most federal agencies I think fit into that you have, in our case we have a customer base who are the small businesses requesting assistance from SBA, but then internally we have our users who have to evaluate the financial backgrounds and is this one being approved or this one not. But then we also have a tremendous interface with the financial industry to actually manage the loans. So again, just as the other gentleman said, our citizen base is much bigger than the others, but when we build a system or we modify it, we have to make sure we're addressing all three areas.
So how do you do that? Like, would you have a governance, we'll use governance, but do you have a process to do that?
What we used to do, and again, I've only been there since January, would be probably take time interviewing and take months to go talk to people and then come back and try to resolve it. Right now we're building it into our user stories so that you talk to all three groups when you make the story, and we see what we need to do if Congress passes some different criteria for banking industry that impacts our loans. Again, our citizen side, they're still applying the same way, but now we've got to adjust how we process the actual financial side. So I think with all of these technologies, the critical part is communicating it and not doing it in a vacuum, not guessing what the end product is. As I said, if we can make the citizen side great, but if we break down on the financial side, then the loans aren't going out and all that technology just went for naught.
Guys, leading us down the path to a good topic that fits into this digital transformation is the use of Agile DevOps. Let me start with Mark, because you guys are usually put out there as the agency that's far ahead of everybody else and really understanding how this works. How does Agile DevOps fit into this digital transformation, and going back to what Guy said, is of building it in to the user stories?
Yeah, I think one thing that we found in the IT world over the years is that we often think we know what customers want or what users want, but we don't, and we see it over and over again. The best way to find out what a customer wants generally is not to ask them and not to guess. It's to put something in front of them and then mold it until it's more exactly what they need. And the only way you can do that effectively is to have a very short cycle time for producing functionality. So with DevOps, for example, what we try to do is constantly be deploying new features to production with a very short lead time. So we can see how users are using them, we can measure how effective they are, we can take that feedback and make incremental changes to it. And I think the more that we try to reach out to the public, the less we understand them well. You know, the more difficult it is to know in advance what's going to work well for them. The more important it is to have very short cycle times and be able to constantly improve and learn.
Mike, at DHS more broadly, love to be able to talk about your Flash contract. We know we can't because there's some protest problems with it.
Thank you.
But you guys obviously are seeing a lot of interest in Agile. TSA just made a big award recently. Talk a little bit about how you, from a CTO's perspective, is working with Agile.
Absolutely. So, you know, this is, I hate to have to agree with Mark, you know, because it feeds his ego. But yeah, no, Mark's absolutely right that the foundational element of some of these digital transformations is the increase in velocity and reduction of cycle time that allows those learning loops, right? The feedback to evolve to what actually works. So there is a tremendous organic interest in agile methodologies and DevOps, and again, they're not one and the same, right? They work very well together. You can use agile methodologies to some extent without DevOps, and but of course we're trying to push the envelope across the department and get adoption on both of those technologies and techniques. What we are seeing is folks know they want it, but they don't quite know how to get there. So in our office, we're trying to provide resources and guidance to help folks increase their maturity with these techniques. Some folks are a bit further along than others, but we are attempting to provide vehicles like Flash. There are other vehicles that we are attempting to get set up. We have resources in my office. We have conversations with folks to, again, help them understand where they can get quick wins, where they can make incremental progress towards increasing their velocity. At the end of the day, if you can't increase that velocity, you're not going to be able to accomplish many of the things that we want. So it is a huge priority for us across the department. We just have to figure out how we can get this giant battleship of an organization moving in that direction, and it's not going to be an even set of progress.
Go ahead, Guy.
I wanted to add to it, I'll put a little wrinkle in it. I've had debates with different people in government on DevOps, and Agile works great for writing code, but it doesn't apply to infrastructure or the cloud. And I strongly oppose that statement, because if you do the cloud properly, it is just another piece of code, and the fact that you're not buying hardware, you're not setting up servers, you're not installing OSs and doing scannings all manually, that you're doing it in an automated fashion. To me, you know, whether you call it DevOps or Agile, it's reinventing the way that you build an infrastructure. We're doing that right now at SBA. We have a data center that, even in just the short time that Marie and I have been there, has had a flood in it. It's had ceiling tiles fall out of the roof and pull network cables out. And if there's no more reason why I want to go to the cloud, it's that I know the big data centers don't do that.
And if it does, it's not your problem.
It's not ours.
It's those other agents.
Yeah, and there'll be copies, so we won't have any downtime. But I really firmly believe that it's really a philosophy. Again, whether you use Kanban boards, Agile, whatever practices you use, it's changing the way the IT organization thinks, the way it becomes customer-centric, works with the customers, and looks to deliver the best solution versus, I like this vendor's product, so I'm going to stay with them until I retire.
Adam, one of the things that I'm hearing is the going back to the user discussion, but where Agile and DevOps, whatever we're going to call it, really takes the organization down that path. Talk a little bit about, from your perspective, when you work with your federal customers, what are you seeing from the Agile DevOps world?
Yeah. So I think everybody's sort of doing Agile. Not everybody's really sure how they're doing it, and everybody's sort of on a different place in the spectrum of Agile. I do question, you certainly can't do, let's see, you said you can do DevOps But
you can do Agile without DevOps.
Right.
DevOps doesn't really have a point unless you're being Agile.
Exactly. So you can do Agile without DevOps, but you can't do DevOps without Agile, right? I think that's the important point to make. And so automation becomes part of the lifestyle of Agile and DevOps, right? As Guy said. So I think as we look at moving workloads into the cloud, I always hate the idea of like a manual operator logging into Amazon, AWS, or whatever your favorite cloud provider is, and provisioning a virtual machine. I think that's the biggest waste of human capital possible. So you automate those processes as much as possible. You automate that entire life cycle of that application, and you can start doing that within your data center, and then automate that out to the cloud, right? So I think that becomes a big part of that transition so that you can begin to approach these other lifestyles like Agile and DevOps sort of in concert with one another.
The automation piece, we could go down a path. That's a whole cybersecurity discussion. Mark, how much does automation, talked to you before about this, so talk a little bit, tell us again about how much automation plays a role in your work use of Agile DevOps.
It's absolutely essential. It's a critical piece of the way that we do things. Not only because of the waste of human capital, but because it's repeatable. It's more secure. You just touched on security because it is repeatable. And if you're trying to speed up your lead time, the critical lever that lets you do that is automating your entire test and delivery pipeline. And with DevOps, that's typically what you're talking about, the time it takes for a change that a developer makes to be experienced by the people who are using the system in production. And it turns out that that part can be reduced to almost nothing by good automation. And that gives you the flexibility to keep taking feedback from production, making small changes, and putting those changes out there again.
Roughly, are you seeing, how do you quantify the use of this automation, the impact it's had on you guys?
Typically, in the DevOps world, people brag about how many deploys per day they're doing, or how many deploys per day per developer. But generally, when you're mature in a DevOps process, you are doing many deploys per day, as opposed to our old school way of doing a deployment each time you do a release, and that happening every year or every 18 months or something. Big difference.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was a conference that we were at together, Mark, where somebody said, deploying code to production is really scary, right? Things can go wrong. If something's really scary, you either do it very, very rarely, almost never do it, or you need to do it a lot so that it becomes less scary. And I think that's the difference you're seeing in DevOps. I would say automation is absolutely critical, and you touched on security, and Mark mentioned it. It's really hard to do Agile in the federal environment and comply with the security folks unless you have automation. Once you explain to the security folks how automation helps improve the quality and make things more secure throughout the process, you now have overcome a significant obstacle to true agility, and that's why automation is absolutely critical.
And in many ways, what Mark's doing and other people in the federal government is testing the code against a preset set of security requirements, and then if there's a problem, fixing it, and then it goes to the next. Mark, am I getting this right? I don't want to
well, we
guess.
do that, and we do other things.
Right.
So the same tests that we would do on the code normally as part of a security process at the end of development, we actually do constantly as the code is being developed in an automated way. We also do what is the security equivalent of exploratory testing, human testing, in that we do penetration testing. So we have people trying to break into the system, and we add that to the automated testing regime.
Let me swing this back around to the discussion, really. I mean, it's easy to get off topic and talk Agile and security and DevOps, but all this is leading us down a path to this idea of easier to transform our services. Adam, give me a sense from your perspective when you hear about the automation, you hear about the work that the guy's doing or Mark's doing at USCIS. How does that path end with better services?
So I think part of it is that engagement that Mark talked about, the idea that we can build sort of a minimum viable product and give that to a customer, whoever that may be, sort of evaluate where they are, how they feel about that, whether or not that works for them. But on the other side of that, what I think is really interesting is when you have developers interacting with their customers and they have a really insightful understanding of what they're building and why they're building it and what the impact on the business is ultimately going to be, you end up with happier developers, right? And so as the state of California said, happy cows make happy milk, or better milk, right? So I think that happy developers, and hopefully by extension happy operations people, if we've got all this automated, end up making better applications for our customers, and we end up being much more responsive to those business needs.
Happy developers. I didn't think I've met one of those before. Guy, let me turn to you a little bit. So we've talked Agile DevOps, but there's other pieces and parts to this digital transformation. There's other tools, there's other platforms. You mentioned the cloud. Talk a little bit about how you guys also are looking at digital transformation maybe outside of the quote-unquote Agile world.
Sure. One thing that Marie and I saw coming to SBA is that we had a very archaic infrastructure, and so the more we tried to transform, basically the roads were broken with potholes. So part of what we're having to do as we're turning the battleship around on a dime is make sure that the infrastructure is reliable. We have enough bandwidth to reach all of our regional and district offices, since SBA is all over the U.S. But we made the concrete decision that we did not want to be in the data center business anymore. So right now we are completing a 3-month, and that's this year, 3-month effort that was not funded to close down our headquarters data center and be in the cloud as infrastructure as a service, using all the technologies that we've been discussing here. The only way to do that is through automation. I know in my current data center here, and when I talk to my co-federal employees at other agencies, if you have 10, 100, 500 servers set up in a data center, I've never had anybody bet me that all 500 are set up the same way. So what Mark had highlighted earlier, being able to automate that when we stand up the next server, it's going to be set up exactly the right way with the right rules applied, with the right security test, with the right scanning, versus the manual where something like SQL Server, they might be on the same version of SQL Server, but some servers will be on Service Pack 1, some will be on Service Pack 3, some are on Service Pack 4. They're not all the same, and that's one of the things that excites me about that transformation is, and part of what I've been telling the staff, we want to simplify what we're doing to make it more secure. The more variables we introduce, the harder it is to keep it secure. And why not be on the latest? In fact, we've launched a campaign called Get Current, Stay Current. I've told the staff there's no reason that somebody should go home and have better computing equipment at their house than we give them as a federal employee. So we're upgrading everything to the current version now. Again, I got the naysayers telling me, Guy, you're going to break all of our systems. And I said, good, because I'd rather have us break it than the hackers break it, because we're running 10, 12-year-old technology that a schoolboy now can pick up the tips on the internet how to break into it.
And when you start talking about standardization, security popped my mind right away. We're going to take a quick break and come back. We can continue this conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Digital Transformation, the Consumerization of IT, sponsored by Red Hat, on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.